Hi, my name is Jason Schmidt, and I'm a solutions architect with NGINX. And I'm here to talk to you a bit about our Mara project. To start with, let's go through a brief introduction of what Mara is. So what is Mara? The answer we like to give is that it's an example architecture using Kubernetes that aims to be as production ready as possible. But there's a lot behind that statement. About a year and a half ago, we were asked to discuss what a modern application is. What's a modern application look like? What is a modern application? And what we started to come up with is the fact that when we talk about applications, we tend to forget all the supporting pieces. So whereas the application is like the bit of the iceberg above the water and where all the attention is focused, there's a lot going on underneath it. There's monitoring and management, observability. Below that, there's Kubernetes, there's an OS, and somewhere way down there is hardware. That all needs to work together in order to prop that application up and make it work. So a modern application is way more than just the application. As we talk about modern applications, we talk about the Mara project, I think it's important to explain who we are and what our interest was and what our bona fides were for going through and putting this together. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a solutions architect, and I'm part of the Community and Alliances team at NGINX. And our team has two broad mandates. We work with our alliance partners, and we work with the open source community. There is a lot of overlap between those two categories, though. So, for example, companies like JFrog, Sumo Logic, Rancher, Lightstep, they have commercial offerings, but they also have a heavy influence and presence in the open source community. Specific to my team, the technical team, we have a very wide and diverse base of knowledge. I'm not going to read the list here, and I don't put this up there as any way of trying to impress people, but what I do want to draw attention to is we have experiences well across the tech spectrum. And anybody who's worked with technologists enough realizes that getting us to agree on something can be difficult. So everything that we're about to talk about with regards to Mara has gone through discussions with people coming from all these different points of view. It's resulted in a lot of discussions, a lot of arguments, and a lot of proof of concepts trying to determine what the best way to do things are. Now, we hope that with Mara, we've come up with our best effort, but we're always interested to learn from other people's experience and examples. So why did we build this? Well, the easiest answer is because we couldn't find anything like this out there. When we started looking into modern applications, we thought we'd go out, pull an example, do some tests, extend it a bit, but we couldn't find anything. What we did find were a lot of anti-patterns, and by that I mean examples that didn't work, examples that were marketing materials masquerading as technical examples, things that we needed to sign up for 3 different trial licenses for that weren't really free. So after doing that for a while, we decided to leverage our experience and build what we considered to be a best practice example. And the most important part of that to us was to highlight the role of open source software as a core part of modern applications. And by that, I mean that we were biased towards open source solutions, and we wanted to prove that using only open source components, we could build a viable modern application. So how do you use Mara? Well, there are a couple ways. The easiest thing to do is to clone the repo and run the whole project. And I've got a slide in a minute or two that just shows the very simple steps required to run it. So you can bring up Mara, interact with it, look at how we've done things, play with the management and monitoring tools. But beyond that, we position Mara more as a way for you to learn from it. Review a pattern that we use for something like logging. See if that works for you. If it works for you, take it and solve that problem in your environment. Beyond that, we'd like you to do things like take out our logging solution, put yours in. Don't like the way we're using Prometheus and think something else would be better, put that in. We've designed Mara to be componentized and taken apart and put back together like a set of Legos. So this is a slide I referred to on the last one. How do I use Mara? It's actually quite simple. You clone the repository, you have access to a cloud or to a Kubernetes installation, you run a setup script, you run the startup script, and it's up and running. This usually takes anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes, depending on where you're running it. But our goal is from the time you clone it to the time you get it up and running should be no more than 30 to 45 minutes, and it should be easy to do. So here's a more detailed drawing of what comes with Mara. And the note there is something we fervently believe in. It's a scaffolding. Build on it, update it, use it to meet your needs. Take it apart. Mara is not designed to just be dropped into production and run. Mara is designed to be a reference. Mara is designed to be a scaffolding and a framework. So that's enough about Mara. We did introduce it last year at Sprint. So we're a little over a year out from Mara, and we've accomplished a lot. And before I get into details, I want to talk about the current themes that we're following in our development work on Mara. The most important theme is stability. We've come a long way in a year, but now it's time for us to slow down the pace and focus on incremental updates. And three main areas we're looking to increase stability are development, deployment, and operations. In terms of development, we want to have more stable, defined interfaces between components. We want to look at generating software bills of material. In deployment, we're bringing in continuous integration, doing more frequent releases, and doing automated testing to see where things break across the various targets we deploy to. And then in terms of operations, we're going to talk a bit about managing breaking changes and managing the different component versions within Mara. Like every project, Mara needs better and more documentation. And we have been working on documentation in all three phases: development, deployment, and operation. We're beginning to create design documents. We're beginning to create deployment documentation. And we're just starting on operators documentation, with our goal being to document this like we would want a production system that we're responsible for to be documented. And finally, there's a number of enhancements that have gone in to Mara over the course of the last year. And one of the most important guidelines we've been following is protocols over products. Where possible, we want to use protocols, preferably open, rather than a given product, so we can swap out components as required. And when we get down to the end of this presentation, we'll be talking about OpenTelemetry. And this is one of the reasons why we're excited about OpenTelemetry. It's OTLP protocol, which is a way that we can send data around and know that we're going to be able to use it in pretty much any form we want to from there. We've also spent time working on our deployment targets, and we plan on bringing all targets to full parity. By that, I mean that each target will have the full range of support as every other target. We also want to make sure that we have full NGINX Ingress controller build support, so you can build custom Ingress controller images as opposed to pulling images from our registries. We're looking at improving our process. We spent a lot of time working with dependencies and versions. And also, as I mentioned, we've got continuous integration in play, and we're beginning to work on better automation of the process. We'll talk a bit about our Ingress support, not only the Kubernetes native Ingress, but also the vendor-specific custom resource definition designed vendor Ingress and the gateway Ingress support. And then, as I mentioned, we'll talk a bit about OpenTelemetry. To start with new deployment targets. When we started, we deployed to AWS. At this point, we have multiple targets. And one of the fastest ways of bringing that about was allowing Mara to talk to any Kubernetes installation that had a kubeconfig file and that would support persistent volumes and load balancers. So right now, Azure and GCP are supported, but only via kubeconfig. But we support these three workstation-based distributions: MicroK8s, K3s, and Minikube. We do have full infrastructure support for AWS, DigitalOcean, and Linode. And by that, I mean you can run Mara and it will provision and configure the infrastructure and deploy itself. So if you have credentials for AWS, DigitalOcean, or Linode, you feed them into the Mara script, and Mara will go ahead and stand up a cluster for you, stand up a registry if necessary, deploy everything, and when you're done, it'll tear everything back down. We spent a lot of time on dependency and version maintenance. There are several areas of work here. One was code version management. We use a number of Python modules, and as we got farther into the process, we realized that we were hitting version incompatibilities between different Python modules and the dependencies of those modules. So we've gone ahead and cleaned that up with lock files and set things up so that we have a consistent Python environment that only changes when we tell it to change. We've also had to work on our Kubernetes management. One thing is API versions. There have been some changes to the APIs, in particular the auth API and the Ingress API that we've had to account for. And we've also run into issues with the managed versions of the clouds. So for instance, DigitalOcean and AWS may both report the same version of Kubernetes, but we have noticed subtle differences in deploying Mara. And this is one of the things that the continuous integration helps us check to see where things fail, even if they are supposedly at the same version. We spent some time working on deployment management, and that includes better able to control Helm chart versions and the image versions deployed by those Helm charts, which leads us into the next problem we fought with, the management of intercomponent dependencies. So for example, a component such as Cert Manager, upgrading that may have unwanted consequences on things that depend on Cert Manager. So we've had to go through and figure out the best way to handle that. And that goes into the final point here. Everything on this page is going into the best practices for Mara, many of which are probably best practices for any Kubernetes deployment. We're just hitting them within the Mara context. We have added in deployment testing. We have Jenkins in place doing automatic deployments to these various clouds and workstation-based Kubernetes installations. Why did we choose Jenkins? For the same reason we chose many of the other pieces being used in Mara. We had experience with it, and it was as close to being a standard as anything is in the world of tech. Is Jenkins the best solution? Maybe, maybe not. But we did start with Jenkins, and in the spirit of Mara, we've provided all of the necessary Jenkins files for people to run their own deploys using them. We've also added status icons to the repository to show the current deployment status. So if we have a failure with AWS, you'll be able to look in the GitHub repo and see right away that we're having a problem. And from there, you can look at the issues and see what's happening. A large amount of work has been done to work with the Pulumi automation API. Mara relies heavily on Pulumi for its automation, and to this point has been using bash scripts that do Pulumi calls. This is overly complex, it's overly repetitive, and it was very difficult to maintain. We have spent a lot of time and effort putting together new Python-based programs to manage deployment, to manage destruction, reduce the complexity, to be more portable. And these are kind of our gateway to allow people to more easily put their own components in place. The bash scripts were useful, but didn't offer the ability to make changes like people want to make. Using Python enables us to easily swap components out and show people how to do that themselves. We've also added several new features to Mara. One feature that we've been working on is Kubernetes Ingress. Currently, Mara only uses the Kubernetes compatible API. This is the Ingress class that comes as part of Kubernetes. Now we have the option for the user to deploy the NGINX vendor API, which is implemented through custom resource definitions, or to use the new NGINX Kubernetes Ingress gateway. Right now, we've tested with the upstream or community Ingress and the NGINX OSS M+ Ingress controller. The question of Ingress is one that gets a lot of discussion on the Kubernetes forums, and this matrix does a good job of breaking down the differences. The standard Ingress API is great for layer 7 protocols. However, if you want to do anything with layer 4, or if you want to do any manipulation or routing, you're going to be unable to do that with the standard Ingress API. So your two choices beyond that are to use the NGINX Ingress controller with custom resource definitions that extend it to take full advantage of the NGINX capabilities, or to use the new Gateway API. The advantage to the NGINX Ingress Gateway API is that it is a standard defined by Kubernetes. So whereas using the NGINX custom resource defined APIs will lock you into NGINX, using the Gateway API enables you to change between different Ingress controllers if you want to. The Bank of Sirius is our fork of the Google Bank of Anthos project and is the application we currently deploy as part of Mara. Over the course of the last year, we've made some huge changes to it, a lot of which are kind of under the hood in terms of bug fixes, readability fixes. and other fixes just to make the application work a bit smoother. Some of the highlights include the addition of OpenTelemetry tracing, the updating of the documentation to explain how to build and how to maintain the Bank of Sirius, updates to the management endpoints for health checks and management, and support for the Docker Compose-driven deployment option. This allows you to deploy and test the Bank of Sirius without the need for a Kubernetes installation. Finally, over the last several months, we've been spending a lot of time working with OpenTelemetry and integrating it into the Mara project. In terms of OpenTelemetry work, we first started by deploying the backend. To do that, we utilize the OpenTelemetry operator, which we then use to deploy the OpenTelemetry collector. The application updates to add OpenTelemetry to the Bank of Sirius were performed next. This involved going through Python and Java code, adding in the necessary modules, adding in the necessary calls to send tracing information out from these applications into the OpenTelemetry collector. Finally, we added in the Jaeger front end to do trace visualization, pulling data from the OpenTelemetry collector. We were also able to take the same trace information and send it to Lightstep and visualize it on their software as a service platform. In addition to that, we were able to take both the trace and the metrics and logging information and send them to Sumo Logic and view it in their SaaS. But for now, the work in progress is all around adding additional trace logic, as well as converting our logging and metrics over to use OpenTelemetry. If you're interested in more, we have a breakout session on Mara and Hotel and the journey towards OpenTelemetry so far. NGINX and OpenTelemetry. This is a work in progress. Currently, OpenTelemetry is included in the NGINX Service Mesh product. It is on the roadmap for the Ingress controller. And the NGINX Hotel module supports tracing, a partial set of metrics, and is planning on adding logging in the future. As these products reach more maturity with OpenTelemetry, we will continue to add them into our model within Mara, both as a way to showcase the power of OpenTelemetry and a way to show people how to use these NGINX products with OpenTelemetry in a production environment. So where are we now with Mara and telemetry? Currently, we collect data from 3 sources. The OpenTelemetry collector consumes traces from the applications that are instrumented. Prometheus is used to consume metrics, and the Elastic Stack consumes logs. For visualization, Grafana is used to view metrics, Kibana is used for logs, and Jaeger is used to view the traces. In order to accomplish all this, we've deployed the OpenTelemetry operator, we've deployed the kubeprometheus stack, and we've deployed the Elastic Stack and FileBeat. And so what does the future hold for telemetry and Mara? Our goal is to utilize OpenTelemetry wherever possible. That means the collector should be the OpenTelemetry collector, which consumes not only traces, but also metrics and logs. We also want to work on visualization and make that more of a user choice. Using the OpenTelemetry collector enables us to put the data in virtually any format that a visualization solution would use. And this is all done by just deploying the OpenTelemetry operator, which will help us deploy any components we need, and then whatever visualization the user chooses to use. Last, I want to talk a bit about community engagement with the Mara project. We've spent a lot of time over the last year writing blog posts, giving talks at conferences, and having conversations with people on GitHub and on our NGINX community Slack. And we love to hear from people. We love to talk about Mara. You can scan the QR code here and be directed to our NGINX community Slack and join the Mara channel. You can go to the GitHub repository and clone and use our repo. You can fork, you can modify, you can issue pull requests. You can engage in discussions and issues. Everybody who's working on the Mara project has been in the industry for quite some time, and as such, our egos have been pretty much eroded to nothing. We do enjoy hearing how people use Mara, and we even enjoy hearing how we were wrong about something or to learn a different or better way to do something. This is, by and large, a community project and something that we work on to help the community so that we can all kind of move forward and best understand how modern applications work in the world of Kubernetes. So we do enjoy hearing from you. Thank you all for your time.